All right, everybody. So let's talk a little bit more about the Stamp Act. Let's do a little bit more detail on the Stamp Act because it's particularly important. It's going to set a series of events in motion that will lead to the organization that's going to be required to fight a revolutionary war, fight a war for independence against Britain. So, what was the Stamp Act? So, you should have read a little bit about this, but going back to 1765, at the end of the French and Indian War, trying to raise revenues, Parliament passes a law that was an attempt to defray some of the costs of the French and Indian War and raise revenues from the colonies. And it was a tax, a direct tax on goods in the colonies. And this is what was so controversial, right? This was new. They had never done this before. They're going to require the placement of a stamp. We'll talk more about that in a second on basically all paper goods, legal documents, newspapers, playing cards, pamphlets, books, anything that was paper required a stamp, and that was how you would pay the tax. You couldn't sell or buy a product without the stamp, so you had to pay that tax to buy or sell that. So it's going to be rejected by the colonists largely because of its nature. Number one, it's a direct tax. It's an excise tax on the colonies. They had done that to themselves, but they were really concerned that Britain was doing this to them without representation in Congress. So that really became the question. Was this something that was within Parliament's power to do, a direct tax like this? Set to go into effect by November 1st of 1765. There were riots prior to that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. In fact, so many riots that we won't have a single stamp collector left by November 1st. They will all have quit. So this right here, this is the Pennsylvania Journal and Weekly Advertiser. This is a newspaper. Publisher William Bradford this is October 31st, so it's the day before the Stamp Act is set to go into effect. And this is his, last newspaper. He says the Stamp Act is going to put him out of business. He's got this place for him to affix the stamp there. So there was a lot of rhetoric, a lot of symbolism, and a lot of pushback against this Stamp Act of 1765. All right. The colonial response was violent. So the Sons of Liberty are going to organize, and the Sons of Liberty would be responsible for kind of starting some riots. They will do this throughout the period. This painting here, you can see the tea getting dumped in the background, and also tea being poured down this poor guy's throat, this tax collector. But just an insight into some of the things that would happen. Tarring and feathering was a common practice at this time. It happened during the Stamp Act and throughout the 1760s and 1770s in the colonies. If you were a stamp collector, you might get grabbed up by a group of rioters, stripped naked. That would get hot tar, pour it all over your body, and then throw feathers on you from a pillow. And if that weren't enough, they would get a rail, a big board. They'd put it on their shoulders, and they'd take your naked, tar-burned, feather-covered body, put it on the rail, and walk you to the edge of town and dump you off, right? So they would stop short of murder usually, but these were very violent acts. These riots were very violent in nature. But in addition to this, in addition to the people taken to the streets, there's going to be some organizing going on in the background, and we're going to see a colonial response that is a response of organization, right? And so that is the Stamp Act Congress, also known as the Continental Congress of 1765. So this is a colony-wide Congress to meet and discuss the response to the Stamp Act, and they are going to demand a repeal of the Stamp Act. We know that happens in 1766. But what's really important, I want you to understand, is that this lays the foundation for a unified response to British oppression or coercion from here on forward. So the colonies have delegates, they send them to Philadelphia, they meet, they discuss, they create a unified front. So this is what Benjamin Franklin was hoping for in 1754 with the Albany Plan of Union. Now it's actually starting to happen with this Stamp Act Congress, and that's why this is so important. It's going to lay the foundation for the first and second Continental Congresses. So first Continental Congress is going to be a few years later in 1774. Still a lot of division among the colonies about how to respond to the acts that are coming out of Parliament. Georgia doesn't even show up in 1774. They don't send delegates. People don't know what the goal of the Continental Congress is. There's people who are starting to talk about independence and a movement for independence, typically from New England. And those in the South are saying, wait, we just want an end to these oppressive laws. We support that, but we don't want to move towards independence. So there's a lot of disagreement. The First Continental Congress ultimately resolves to boycott British goods unless the intolerable acts are repealed. And these are the ones that were particularly disturbing to those in New England, particularly Boston. All right, and you should have learned about that in the reading or the other lecture. Okay. All right, then the Second Continental Congress, this is where we're going to wrap up. 1775, all 13 colonies are represented. The fighting had already begun in Lexington and Concord, and this is going to be the colonies creating a unified response with the Second Continental Congress. They're going to do the heavy lifting of naming a commander-in-chief to the army. So George Washington is going to be named commander-in-chief. One of the reasons he's chosen, he's widely respected, but he's also a Virginian. And they thought that this would kind of unify the colonial response. There was some division north and south about the Revolution. They're going to commission the drafting of and ultimately approve and sign a Declaration of Independence, a formal declaration of independence from Britain, a philosophical statement, a unifying statement, but also a formal declaration of independence. We are no longer part of Great Britain. And that's why we celebrate our Independence Day with the signing and approving of the Declaration of Independence. All right, and then finally, they're going to draft and pass the Articles of Confederation, which is, now that we are separate from Great Britain, how are we going to organize ourselves and have a unified government for the 13 colonies? And so the Articles of Confederation are going to be the first governing document of the United States of America. And so we're going to learn more about that in our next unit of study. The Articles of Confederation ultimately will fail, but it was a major accomplishment of the Second Continental Congress. Okay, so this act, this Stamp Act, this tax, this direct tax on paper goods in the colonies, sets the wheels in motion for the development of organization, communication across the colonies that will ultimately pave the way for independence in the colonies. All right, so hope that helps, and I will see you soon.